Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be starting shortly, right at the hour. Well, in the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. You'll see in the chat box that the default setting is set to just responding to all panelists. In order to engage everyone with your comment and have everyone be able to respond, please make sure to change your setting from the default to all panelists and attendees. So that way other folks can see what you have to say in the chat box as well and create some dialogue there. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and the resources will be shared out to all folks who have registered. We also are putting all of our resources that you'll see in this presentation onto our webinar registration page. That link will be shared with you in the chat box as well, and you can go there for all the resources as well as the webinar recording and webinar presentation slides at the conclusion of today's webinar. Again, just as a reminder, if you are using the chat box, please change the default setting to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comment and respond to it. All right, thank you. We'll be beginning shortly. If you're just now joining us, thank you so much for being here with us today. I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes before we start. First of all, if you are just joining us now, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. When you are using the chat box, make sure to change the default setting from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. So that way everyone can see your comment and engage with it, and we can create some dialogue throughout today's presentation. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and the resources and the webinar recording will be shared out through email to all registered guests. We are also posting the webinar recording, the presentation slides, and all the resources you'll see shared today on our webinar registration archive page. That link will be shared in today's chat and shared frequently, so it'll be kind of your one-stop shop to get all of today's resources. And a great place to go back to or refer to later on if you'd like to see any of the resources that are being shared out today. With that, we'll be starting in just a minute.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm very excited to get everything started today. I'm Jillian Luckner of the Afterschool Alliance, a national nonprofit working to ensure accessible, affordable, and engaging out-of-school time opportunities for all youth. We really thank you all again for joining us on this webinar. This is one of the Afterschool Alliance's American Rescue Plan series. In our prior webinars, we were discussing the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Funds, or ESSER, opportunities in national service, and we have upcoming webinars in this series on the state and local relief funds as well. Today, we discuss what I consider to be one of the most foundational pieces in the rescue plan package, a component which not only, as you know, operated throughout the pandemic as essential work, but is really critical to the national recovery, to getting people back into the workforce and ensuring all our children and youth, once again, are accessing spaces that support their social and academic growth. This is childcare. And sometimes nationally, when we say childcare, we often might get a picture of a center or an in-home daycare provider that's serving infants or 2 or 3 or 4-year-olds. And not always necessarily comprehensive after-school programs. But the Child Care Development Block Grant is designed to serve children from infancy to age 13. And after all, those working parents of the 9-year-olds are needing care just as much as those parents of the 3-year-olds. And of course, that care is going to look very different and should look very different. And comprehensive after-school and summer programs are one way to meet that continuum of needs. So today, our goal is to have a discussion about how to use the American Rescue Plan funding and this opportunity really strategically and ensure that school-age children ages 5 to 13, and the needs they and their families have are really considered and coordinated in these fund uses, and that school-age programs, like so many of you on this webinar, are really part of that conversation. We hope this work will support not just recovery from the pandemic, but also just advancement of the childcare sector and those it serves overall. So on the next slide, I'm really truly honored to present the great panelists that we have here today to talk about this issue of school-age care, both from policy and practice perspectives. We have Alicia Hardy and Tiffany Ferret of the Center for Law and Social Policy, this well-known nonprofit organization operating for over 5 decades to reduce poverty, promote economic opportunity, and advance equity. We have Elena Rocha of the YMCA of the USA, which supports youth development for 9 million youth across 10,000 communities in the United States. Gloria Hampton of Unleashing Potential, a program with over 100-year history that's in St. Louis, Missouri, and has become one of the largest providers of free after-school services in that area. We have their bios and links, as Chandler mentioned, to these organizations on our webinar registration page, and you can also find, again, a copy of today's slides on that page as well. So on the next slide, so to begin, we want to know who's here joining us today. So if you could just please take a quick poll. We're interested in knowing who's joining the conversation. Okay, if you're just joining us, we're taking a quick poll. And Chandler, if you can just let me know when we have some responses to share. Okay, so as we continue to answer the poll to see who's on the webinar joining us, we'll just quickly go over our agenda for the hour. We're planning to present a national policy perspective, followed by a provider with some national reach, a local provider operating in a major metropolitan area, and an overview of opportunities and actions before getting into what we hope will be, again, a robust Q&A. So as Chandler mentioned, please continue to ask any questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box and respond at all times in the chat to all attendees and panelists so that we can have a robust conversation. And we also, before getting into our panel, I just want to share, it looks like from the results of our poll, we have many school-age provider after school and summer programs, some statewide after-school networks, national organizations, some state agency directors, local intermediaries. We don't have any local intermediaries, and a number of other. And it seems like of those programs on the call, a number are uncertain about their access and use of this funding stream, which hopefully will make this conversation today a very important conversation moving forward with how to access and utilize these funds. So thank you for answering the poll. And with that, we'll pass it over to begin our panel, and I will pass it over to Alicia of the Center for Law and Social Policy. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I can't see myself on camera, so it's kind of, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your time. I'm so excited to present this important information, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So first, I'd just like to set the scene for school-age care prior to COVID-19. This is really critical in beginning to understand how the global health pandemic has impacted school-age care. Prior to, I'm sorry, you can go to the, thank you, sorry. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, policy discussions around the needs of school-age children often hyper-focused on the formal education and minimized the importance of care, when instead care and education should be viewed as complementary and equally important across the care continuum. The need for childcare doesn't end at age 5 when children enter school, especially since as children transition from childcare to school, working parents and caregivers often need to arrange care to fill in the gaps in care during before and after school time. In addition, school-age care also includes care over the summer while schools are on break, during school breaks such as Christmas and Thanksgiving, as well as during non-traditional hours and weekends to accommodate the full range of parent and caregiver needs. And school-age care is absolutely essential. It's essential for creating an aligned and accessible childcare system where families do not have to experience disruptions in care as their children grow older. This aligned system is also helpful in coordinating care for families with multiple children across age groups. For example, a parent with an infant and a school-age child will need to have full-time care for both children during the summer and during other school breaks, and part-time care for the school-age child and full-time care for the infant child during the school year. An aligned system would really ensure that this family can access and afford quality care for both children year-round. School-age care is also essential to maintaining continuity in children's development across the care continuum. It allows for a smooth transition from early childhood to school-age care in a way that meets children's changing needs as they grow older. School-age care is also essential for providing economic stability for families, especially for mothers who often bear the brunt of child rearing. And so when school-age children are in positive, nurturing, and safe environments, it allows parents and caregivers to have fewer work interruptions due to a lack of care. And so with saying all of that, you can't negate the importance of school-age care, but neither can you overlook the inequities related to access for school-age children, particularly for families with low incomes and families with low income who are also families of color. Many of the barriers for families with young children, many of the barriers that families with young children face related to affordability, access, and supply are also reflected in school-age care, and these barriers are compounded for families of color. According to data from the Afterschool Alliance and the America After 3 p.m. survey, in 2020, for every child that was enrolled in an after-school program, there were 3 more waiting to get into a program, which really signals that the need for after-school programs far exceeds the supply of programs. These data also showed that while 50% of all school-age children were unable to access after-school programs, 50% of children with low incomes, 52% of Latinx families with low incomes, and 59% of Black families with low incomes were unable to access care, again, reflecting inequities in access for families with low incomes, and especially for families with low incomes who are also families of color. The America After 3 p.m. survey also showed that 58% of Black and 55% of Latinx families would enroll in an after-school program were one available, compared to just 46% of white parents, which signals an increased need for school-age care for families of color. And this is for a variety of reasons. But additional access barriers that families of color reported also have to do with higher response rates in the the America After 3 p.m. Survey, which these families of color and Latinx families who are also families of low income indicated that after-school programs are just too expensive, they're unavailable in their communities, and that families lack safe transportation options to get children back and forth from these programs. These data, when considered in the context of families of color being disproportionately represented in jobs with non-traditional work hours due to underlying systemic racial inequities, it really makes it especially alarming that only 1/3 of home-based providers and about 8% of center-based providers serve families during non-traditional hours. So these inequities are present, and then they're also reinforced through federal funding priorities, where despite only 8% of center-based providers serving families with non-traditional work hours, 75% of funding goes towards center-based care, and this is according to the 2019 CCDF data. So there's a mismatch between the percentage of providers who are giving this care and the amount of funding that goes towards providers who are not providing that care. And so speaking of funding, the 2 largest sources of federal funding for school-age care are the 21st Century Learning Community Centers Initiative and the Childcare and Development Block Grant. The 21st Century Community Learning Centers Initiative is the only federal funding source that is solely dedicated to support the needs of school-age children. These programs serve close to 2 million youth through state education agency grants based on a state share of children with, who are receiving Title I funding. The CCDBG Act, or the Childcare and Development Block Grant Act, is a law that authorizes the Child Care and Development Fund program, and it's the main federal funding source that helps families afford child care for children ages 0 to 12. These funds are passed down from the federal level to states, territories, and tribes to provide financial assistance to low-income families to access care. While CCDF is the main funding source to help families with low incomes to afford childcare, the program is only able to serve 1 in 6 eligible children due to underfunding. This lack of funding especially impacts school-age children who receive fewer subsidy supports in relation to other age groups when compared to the overall population of children. So what I mean by this is that according to the 2019 American Community Survey data, children ages 6 to 12 account for nearly 55% of children from 0 to 12, but only account for 34% of children in care supported by CCDF subsidies. So there's a mismatch between the number of the school-age children who are present in our within our society and the number of children who are actually receiving those supports through CCDF. And this lack of funding also impacts school-age providers who struggle to make enough profits to cover costs in out-of-school care teachers who receive inadequate workforce supports and who are typically paid much lower wages and receive fewer benefits than other educators since their positions are often part-time. In addition, the low subsidy payment values, the costly administrative burdens associated with operating in the subsidy system, and the limited number of hours in care for school-age, the limited number of hours that school-age children spend in care often result in providers being unable to provide care for school-age children, which severely impacts the supply for school-age care. And in fact, according to the Afterschool Alliance's analysis, for the first time in more than a decade, the number of children in after-school programs has decreased. We can move to the next slide. And so setting that scene was really important because as more data continues to become available to describe the severe impacts of COVID-19 on school-age care, one thing becomes painfully clear. The lack of funding, high costs, inequitable access, and other issues I previously covered were greatly exacerbated, especially for communities with low incomes and communities of color with low incomes. Provider closures, and this happened in a number of ways. For providers, this happened through provider closures, where more with provider closures being more prominent across communities of color. Providers within these communities who are often also people of color had less access to federal support such as PPP loans early in the pandemic, and this resulted in a more difficult and unstable recovery for those providers. Parents and caregivers in communities of color also face increased economic and unemployment instability, food and housing insecurity, exposure to COVID-19, due to overrepresentation in essential jobs. And so this created an increased need for childcare programs across the continuum, particularly within communities of color who are also communities who are low income. My colleague Tiffany is going to go into a bit more detail around increased federal funding to meet these increased needs. However, there are additional considerations for school-age children, their families and the providers and staff who care for them, including transportation, which was noted as a significant barrier to access and care in the America After 3 p.m. survey from the Afterschool Alliance, because unlike early care, school-age children may need to access before and after care that is not located in the same building where they attend school, which is an additional cost to parents and providers. There are also additional considerations around mental health supports for children, providers, and care workers who have experienced an unimaginably difficult year of transition, adapting, and possibly dealing with family issues related to job loss, illness, death, and other significant changes in their lives. There also have to be considerations for increased wages for out-of-school teachers and providers who have long since needed significant wage increases and who unequivocally have filled the gap in care during school closures over the last year. Another consideration that are the increased provider, are how to increase provider participation in the subsidy system for school-aged children. And this can be done through a number of ways, through increased subsidy payments, through reducing administrative burdens to participate in the subsidy program, and by better aligning standards of care and requirements for school-age providers that do not apply standards for young children to those for school-age children. And the requirements for young children can be much more cumbersome and expensive, despite having children who are not necessarily meeting those particular supports and requirements. And so finally, I just wanted to give an idea of some estimates that we've done at class. So we estimated that the cost to reach all eligible school-age children through CCDBG is between 48.4 and 79.6 billion. However, this estimate should really be viewed as a floor and not a ceiling, and a floor upon which to build into the additional to build upon the additional considerations that I previously referenced. So by increasing investments into CCDBG by at least this amount, the 48.4 to 79.6 billion, families can begin to gain greater access to high quality and equitable care. And this is just extremely important as we continue to recover and build back better and to do so equitably. With that, I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Tiffany, who will go into more detail around federal funding and how states are able to access those funds for school-aged care.
Great, thank you very much, Alicia. And first, just thank you to the Afterschool Alliance for having us, and again to Alicia for setting that scene. So I do want to go into a little bit more detail about the timeline for relief and recovery, as well as what's available currently through federal legislation for the entire continuum of care, particularly school-age care, and then talk a little bit about who administers these programs and how the funds can be used. As Alicia beautifully set the scene, in March 2020, we know that a lot of states began to close school districts and childcare programs, and programs were suspended and even permanently closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Alicia pointed out, even prior to the pandemic, schools provided a key resource for before and after school care, as well as community organizations, such as the ones that we're going to hear from a little bit later on this webinar, in providing these services for care outside of home or school. And so as a response to the pandemic, the federal government has passed 3 legislative packages to offer relief and move towards recovery. So I'm sure many of you on this call are familiar with these packages, but beginning on March 27th, 2020, that was the first package that was enacted, which was the CARES Act, or the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic, Security Act. And this was about $3.5 billion that went into CCDBG, or the Child Care Development Block Grant for childcare. 9 months later, exactly to the day, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act was enacted that included an additional $10 billion into CCDBG. And then the most recent was the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARP, or ARPA, as some folks are calling it for short, which gave almost $39 billion for childcare. The American Rescue Plan Act was bifurcated into 2 different pools of money. So the first was of the $39 billion was $24 billion for stabilization grants, and these are meant to go directly to eligible providers. And then another $15 billion in supplemental discretionary funds, which is really a pot of money to go towards childcare subsidy so that low-income families can have access to childcare programs. So here I just want to note 2 things. The first is that the American Rescue Plan is unique from the previous 2 packages because it doesn't require that the funds just be spent on COVID-specific activities. So within the American Rescue Plan, there's the opportunity for school-age providers and all eligible childcare providers to use these funds for other things that their program may need. For example, reimbursing providers for costs that they've incurred over the past year due to the pandemic. And then the second thing that I want to note here is that school age care has been specifically addressed within the American Rescue Plan, and certainly within guidance that is sent out from the federal government, the Administration for Children and Families, to states who administer these grants. So next, I just want to briefly go over what's available for school age care. So as Alicia mentioned, the Child Care Development Fund, or CCDF, is the federal and state partnership program authorized under CCDBG and administered by states. And this is really meant to provide financial assistance to low-income families to access childcare. And CCDF does, as we discussed, cover families who have children 0 to 13. So this is particularly helpful for school age care to be able to access subsidies for families, and also to think about multiple children within the same family being able to have care. So the American Rescue Plan acknowledges this importance for not only before and after care, but also care in the summer. And all school age providers who meet the requirements for an eligible childcare provider should be included at the state level to receive these subgrants. And this includes license exempt providers who meet CCDF health and safety requirements. And next, I created this wheel, as you'll see on my right side of the screen, perhaps your left, depending on the mirroring. But this is basically a wheel with all the spokes of how these funds are administered. So first, as you'll notice, the Child Care Development Block Grant at the federal level then moves down to the state level to the lead child care agency in that state. And a state administrator is pivotal in dispersing these funds both equitably and efficiently, and using the guidance from the federal government on how to use this to support low-income families. And then those funds go directly to providers and to programs and to families to be able to access childcare. And the last thing I just want to mention is the role of philanthropy and non-government actors who also provide scholarships and other support to childcare programs for both school age care and the entire continuum of care. And then just lastly, as I wrap up, I want to just leave you with this message, which is invest early, invest often, and invest equitably. As these funds are going to states and excitingly to the local level, the investments are historic and will provide much needed relief to families and providers. But as Alicia set the stage for, the data has informed us what communities need and will continue to inform us of the needs moving forward as we rebuild a childcare system, both an early care system and school age system that works for all families and all providers. And so just want to first say that though these funds are temporary, needing to be used by September 2024 for the subsidy part and by September 2023 for stabilization grants, this relief will lead to hopefully longer term recovery as we really support what's going to work best for families moving forward. So at this time, I will stop and pass to Elena Rocha, who will give the next part of the presentation. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tiffany. So that was actually a really great overview of something that is quite complex, and that being federal child care relief funding. I am going to talk a little bit more about CCDBG as well as the continuum from more of a systems level perspective and through the lens of the YMCA, but I first want to take a moment to introduce you all to the Y. So the Y is actually the nation's largest nonprofit provider of early learning and after school care, with more than 1,400 early learning sites, 7,300 after school programs, 1,800 summer day camps, and 265 resident camps. Our youth development work supports young people along their journey into adulthood to help them meet critical milestones along the way and to help support them during critical transitions in their lives. So the continuum is very essential to our approach. While the WISE youth development roadmap spans birth to age 24, the majority of the kids that we serve really do fall along the 0 to 13 continuum. We believe that all parents should have access to affordable and quality programs, that all kids should have access to enrichment and academic support opportunities, and that families should have access to wraparound services if and when they need them. And we believe that school-age childcare programs help sustain the benefits of early childhood education. At the Y, we see that our school-age childcare programs help improve students' academic attitudes, performance, and behaviors, nurture their social and career-ready skill development, and enhance their overall health and well-being. Now, what makes these outcomes possible at the Y and across other programs in the field really is the secret sauce behind school-age childcare, and that is an out-of-school time field that really understands positive youth development and the role that relationships, environments, and experiences have on young people. a field that is also, constantly strengthening adult practices to support the healthy development of kids, that nurtures social emotional development, invests in experiential learning, emphasizes healthy eating and physical activity, and so much more. But we know that there aren't enough affordable programs to meet national demand. And we know that school-age childcare has really been struggling in the face of COVID. And this is why the Child Care and Development Block Grant and the Child Care Stabilization grants in the American Rescue Plan, I think can really be game changers for both providers and the young people in our care. So what did CCDBG funding look like to the Y prior to COVID? Well, before the pandemic, we had hundreds of Ys participating in their state's childcare subsidy program, helping to make early learning and school-age care more affordable to the families in their communities. But some YMCA school-age childcare programs face challenges being part of this system. And that really is because some state childcare licensing requirements and regulations were designed for early learning programs serving young kids. So these requirements were not age appropriate or not appropriate when applied to school-age programs because of the age of kids in care and the setting where school-age programs take place, like school buildings. And I mention this because it is a contributing factor as to why school-age childcare programs may be license exempt. And license exempt providers are not eligible to access CCDBG funding, even though they are meeting critical standards like health and safety. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. So when COVID hit, it really did shine a very bright spotlight on childcare, and it really did help to elevate the need for school-age childcare in particular. And I would say for the first time in a very long time, school-age childcare became a national priority, a state priority, and an economic imperative. I think the last time school-age childcare was on the national stage the way that it is now was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, when everyone was addressing the latchkey child issues. So the COVID relief funding that Tiffany described has been tremendously helpful to the Ys in a great number of states due to COVID. I would say we were probably about 6 months into COVID when we surveyed our YMCA movement and learned that half of our Ys reported they were able to access CARES Act funding. The CARES Act was the first package that was made available. And that funding really helped our Ys pay existing staff salaries, purchase PPE and cleaning supplies, provide hazard pay to their staff, and provide emergency childcare to essential personnel. While this funding was initially slow to trickle out in some states, overall, it did make a very big impact to our Ys as they were adjusting to the new realities of providing emergency and school-age care during a pandemic. By the time CRSA, or the second stimulus package, was passed in December, I think states had really learned a lot more about what providers and families needed most. And that's when I think we all started to see that states were beginning to provide relief for families from tuition and co-payments. They were raising reimbursement rates, and they were beginning to use the relief funds to help providers cover the increased operating expenses through things like grants and stipends. These relief funds were really critical, but we did see that YMCA access to these stimulus dollars was uneven across the states. And just to give you a couple of examples, in states like Georgia and North Carolina, relief funds were allocated only to licensed programs. So this meant that license-exempt school-aged programs were restricted from the funds. And as a result, some Y staff and programs missed out on much of the CARES and CRSA funding that was directed to school-aged childcare. In other states like Arizona or Tennessee and many others, YMCA childcare centers received emergency funding through state contracts to remain open and provide essential care. And they also received additional funding to help cover operational costs. In Arizona, these relief dollars really helped to ensure that YMCA childcare programs survived at a time when enrollment was very low. And so these are just a couple of examples, and I can tell you that we saw several other scenarios play out across the states. But there is one other observation that I think is really important that I want to share with you all, and that is that YMCAs in states like Massachusetts and Maine were really working closely with other early learning and school-age providers to ensure that state decision makers understood provider needs across the continuum and to ensure that providers have equitable access to these relief dollars. Next slide. This collaboration across the continuum with all types of providers, center-based, family, childcare, Head Start, other types of programs, I think was really pivotal in elevating the realities and the needs of the field and how federal funds could really best address these needs. I would say across the board, we have heard that YMCAs have never worked better together than they have during COVID. And across the board, we've also heard that YMCAs have never worked better with the other providers in their states than they have during COVID. And I mention this because I think it really speaks to the shared responsibility and commitment that the field has for the kids and families that we collectively serve. And because of this, I think that there is enormous power and potential in the field. And part of the story that speaks to this power and this potential is how the school-age childcare providers really stepped up during COVID to fill significant gaps in our communities. I think we all know we were able to flip on a dime. Providers went from, providing our regular out-of-school time programming that had to close one day and then literally reopen emergency childcare the next. At the Y, we're meeting the needs of the whole child and providing kids with meals and snacks, physical activity, enrichment, safe spaces, and we're helping to address mental health and emotional wellness of the young people that are in our care. Not to mention the fact that we're working to re-engage and reconnect kids to help set them up for academic success in the fall. But it's not just been the funding or these community collaborations that I think are driving impact. It's also the various flexibilities that come along with the relief dollars and national and state emergency declarations. Now, I will say that some of these flexibilities have been applied unevenly across the states, but they have been very important nonetheless. So from the WISE perspective, some of the most significant flexibilities include waiving income eligibility, which enabled WISE to offer care to essential personnel working on the front lines of the pandemic, regardless of family income, basing reimbursements on enrollment and not attendance, allowing CCDBG funds to be used towards school-aged care when children are in remote and virtual learning, which supported YMCA learning labs across the country. And let's see, states temporarily enrolling unlicensed providers so that more families could be served during the pandemic. We also saw states exercising their ability to provide relief funding to providers not previously participating in the state's childcare subsidy program. One other, the USDA child nutrition waivers, I think, have absolutely been transformative for all of this work. So all in all, I think the combination of these flexibilities, the relief funding, especially the relief funding that's in the American Rescue Plan, and the community collaborations are really setting up the school-age childcare field to be stronger. We've certainly learned a lot since last March, and as we move forward, I think it's going to require ongoing collaboration across the field to ensure that we don't just go back to the way things were pre-pandemic, because we know that the childcare system was too fragile, and we also know that school-age childcare was too often an afterthought. I know that Jillian is going to share more on this later, so I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Gloria Hampton, who's the Director of School Age Services with Unleashing Potential, located in St. Louis, Missouri. Gloria?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm excited to be a part of the panel today. We've got some fantastic presenters. I'm still learning a lot. So I want to tell you a little bit about Unleashing Potential and how sorry, forgot to unvideo myself, but about how Unleashing Potential kind of survived through the pandemic and continues to thrive. So about Unleashing Potential, we are a youth serving organization in the city of St. Louis. We started out in 1913 as what was known as a settlement house, which is really how the field of social work got its start. And some of the issues that we tackled at that time were the issues of inadequate housing, lack of proper medical attention, and poor education for the children. And so we have evolved. We can go to the next slide. Over the years, we have evolved, and today we are what's known as a faith-based human service ministry, and we continue to be actively sponsored by some of our original founders, which were the United Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ as well. We are a nonprofit organization, a separate entity from a faith-based entity. And we are today known as Unleashing Potential. We've gone through a number of iterations over the years, but today we are known as Unleashing Potential. We definitely felt like this was a much better representation of the work that we are doing currently and where we want to go and be known in the city of St. Louis. We can go to the next slide. And so currently the organization provides 3 core programs: early childhood education, school age services, and youth development. Our mission is to close the opportunity gap for children and youth by building on their strengths. And we do that through our 3 core programs. With early childhood education, we serve children 6 weeks to 5 years of age there, and with the whole goal of making sure those students are, those babies and young children are ready for kindergarten when they leave our facility. Then we have our school age services program that children are able to transition into. I'll tell you a little bit more about how broad and wide that spans. But our goals there are really to provide that safe, caring place for children during those out of school time hours when parents absolutely need the care for their children so that they can work. Some of the things that we focus on are the social and emotional, as well as academic development. We have definitely been a proponent of the STEM education. Robotics is just one of those venues that we use. And then we not only provide the before and in the after school program, but we also provide kind of that gap care that happens during the year where there's a PD day every month. And we know that, you know, if you are an essential personnel worker, that you don't necessarily have the flexibility to take off every month at the same time, you know, for school. And so we do fill those gaps. So we fill the gap of the professional development days, the early dismissal days, the spring break camps, things like that, so that parents can continue to work. And then we also offer a very comprehensive summer program, one of the most robust in this area. We are a full 8-week program, usually from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the evening, because we have a lot of working parents that need the care. We also have a youth development component that is currently on hiatus, but it's a social entrepreneurship program for teens between the ages of 15 to 19, I believe is the age range. And there our focus was to support young people in learning essential workplace skills as well as life skills, provide them with employment and opportunity to make some money and get some skills, some solid skills, and to support them until through graduation. We can go to the next slide. This just says, again, a little bit about the vision, St. Louis community where all children, youth, and families live into their potential. We are hopeful to live out this vision every day. And I've talked to you a little bit about our mission already. We can go to the next slide. This just talks about some of the services that we provide. Jillian really wanted me to kind of walk you through a day in the life of what it looks like in a program that we offer. So we provide, we have at our disposal several curricula that we use on a consistent basis, from social and emotional, which is what conscious discipline is, all the way through the health and safety of FAT5, literacy and math, computer science and Quirkles, and the science and robotics and the STEM programming through Lego. So we try to capture all of that and allow the students opportunities to experience all of that. And then we move right into the extracurricular, which is what we kind of call that enrichment, where students have the opportunity to participate in the visual and performing arts, sports, cooking, entrepreneurship, chess, music, all of that, and have a good time and be able to walk away with some solid skills from that. And then in terms of the out of school time services that we offer to families, is that our programs for the most part, are offered at no cost to families. And we are able to do that through the sources of funding, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But we do serve an underserved population. And our entire goal with serving the underserved population is to make sure they have access and access to the same type of programming that their counterparts would receive. And so we are definitely trying to make sure that we are providing equitable services across the entire range of our program. We are located in St. Louis, and we can go to the next slide. And this talks about a little bit about what our schedule looks like. It's a typical daily schedule that, you know, consists of our normal transitions from the school day, the brain breaks or icebreakers, as we call it. We actually provide a hot dinner. We know that this is typically the last meal that children receive of the day. So we provide a hot meal. This was kind of pre-pandemic, a hot meal, and they also get a snack to take home with them. Because we want to make sure that, again, our young people are eating and getting what they need to be able to transition to the next thing. And it also allows our parents to be able to spend more time with the young people once they get home and prepare for bedtime. Our enrichment programming, we talked a little bit about that, but that's typically the time where our young people can break into clubs or the activities that they really enjoy doing. Free time and homework, or what we call free choice. We do offer homework help daily. We have academic tutors on staff that provide additional support to students that may be struggling and need help, but homework help is a daily part of our routine. And then we have our cleanup, student pickup, and dismissal in preparation for the next day. We can go to the next slide. So I just have a couple of pictures to kind of show what it looks like during COVID. Again, practicing things that have now become routine for our young people, the 6 feet apart, making sure they're keeping their distance, the mask. We're still able to keep our routine. We want to make sure that we are still providing those opportunities to connect and unite and build community. We can go to the next slide. We typically do an affirmation. This is what our affirmation looks like at one of our locations. Next slide. As you can see, this is one of the activities that one of our sites does. It's called Meditation Mondays, and we're teaching the kids, again, that whole ability to self-regulate and manage their emotions, their behaviors, and the kids they really enjoyed, and they need it really after their school day. It helps them to kind of decompress. So we actually do meditation every day. That's not just a Monday thing. Next slide. Again, just in some pictures and of some activities that we do. Kids in the Kitchen is an annual series that we do with our young people, and it's teaching them life skills for cooking. Many of them things that they can make at home without having to cook or having to utilize the help of someone else, things that they can do very easily on their own. Next slide. And then again, this is some of the artwork that our young people worked on this year for Black History Month. Next slide. And I wanted to, before my time is up, just talk to you about a little bit about the funding sources that we have. When I first started with the organization, we really focused on we have one main source of funding for our after-school programming, and we have really worked to diversify those funding streams. So we serve 3 different districts, and we have a different source of funding within each district. Within one district, we utilize funds through the state of Missouri and our mental health board. And that is funneled through an intermediary, or we are a subcontractor for those schools. And it's able to be renewed annually. And it's on a reimbursable time frame. So we're able to get reimbursed on a monthly basis. for those expenses. In our second district, we have what's called the School Age Community or SAT grant, and that's in partnership with the district. It is administered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It's a 3-year grant. It's reimbursable monthly. However, also in this district, the SAT grant does not fully cover the expenses. And so we do rely on parent fees, not market rate fees, but it's a subsidized fee that parents pay. And we also have, parents also have the opportunity to receive DSS subsidy through Department of Social Services. And then in our final district, we do utilize 21st Century Dollars that's administered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It's a 5-year grant, reimbursable on a monthly basis, or however often you want to submit invoices. And we have found that the diversification of funds really allows us to be able to maintain and sustain programming throughout the years. And so I know my time is up, and so I'm going to stop right here, but feel free to include any questions in the chat. And check out our website. Our website was also put in the chat. And like I said, we're a small nonprofit, not really small, but we're a nonprofit organization in St. Louis. And I appreciate your time today. I'm going to turn it back over to Jillian at this time.
Great, thank you so much, Gloria, and thank you to all the speakers on the panel. As those of you who are on the webinar can attest alongside me, the speakers on the panel have covered the wide range of opportunities down to a picture of exactly what a program can look like. And so my job is simply to kind of review some of the main talking points and to allow programs on this call to do what you do best and continue your work and use this opportunity as an opportunity for advocacy. So this is just a quick slide to showcase that if you're a program on this call, this is really a moment to step into the conversation. If you haven't been helping map out your state's childcare planning before, or discussing how to use the funds that come from the Childcare Development Block Grant, now is the time to engage. And if you are a program administrator or somebody who works in the state level, I like to think of it as putting your hands at 9 and 3. So they've changed the policy now for driving, where your hands used to be at 10 and 2 to 9 and 3. But just always consider the needs of a 3-year-old alongside the needs of a 9-year-old, recognizing, as people on the panel already so eloquently mentioned, that school age care operates along a continuum and that needs change along that continuum. And it's important for parents to have the full range of needs as their child ages into the K-12 system. The next slide. So I don't have to point this out to anyone really on this call. The benefits of school age care are numerous, but I did want to put them all in a slide because as you're making the case, it's potentially helpful to discuss, as again, our other panelists have mentioned, that school age care, quality after school programs really do establish that continuum to not just sustain the gains of early childcare, but really add to them. There are additive effects of out of school time programs. And so early childcare improves children's life outcomes. And then in addition, out of school time improves them more so that students have better academic and behavioral outcomes when the two are combined. The field has a research-based approach. As Gloria mentioned, 100 years of positive youth development stand behind us, if not more. And they apply that research-based approach to the work they do. And so when quality and professional development are invested in, the whole field, children and parents benefit. And additionally, there's additional research that's been coming out on adolescent brain development. And it's really interesting, showcasing how adolescent brains are growing and pruning neural cells at nearly the rates of infancy. And so it's a huge moment in youth development that needs to be capitalized on. And this is especially a priority for ages 9 to 11, when students are at the beginning of that change in their development and can really be used to mark kind of the next stage in their youth development progress. So on the next slide, Chandler. So as Alicia and Tiffany mentioned, the opportunity comes from the need. And so we know that the subsidy is only reaching 1.9 million out of 13.5 million eligible children, and that actually is even less so for our older and older children. And so we only have 15% of eligible 10 to 12-year-olds accessing subsidy. So I just wanted you to have access to these slides as you go in and make the case for why your program ought to be accessing these childcare funds. And if it is accessing these funds, why it might be important to continue to expand and grow your program. On the next slide, Chandler. Additionally, just offering again the America After 3 research, which is was put in the chat box as another means to look at kind of the needs of the field and helping to use these funds to break down barriers to access. Okay, next slide. So once again, the amount of numbers involved in the American Rescue Plan for childcare can be a little bit staggering. And so it's nice to see it in a graph and really see how, although the childcare development funds have been increasing in terms of their discretionary funding over the years since 2017, really what we have now is unlike anything else in the past. And so working with your state agency on how these funds are used now and in the future will be key to really setting the foundation for school-age childcare along the continuum as we move forward. Next slide. And so this is another tribute to the great work of CLASP. They've created a timeline of just how the funds will be employed over time. And really want to mention that while this timeline extends to 2024, when the funds will be liquidated, decisions are happening right now. And these funds have to be included in plans as early as July 1st. And will be expected, the stabilization fund, which is the $24 billion funding stream, is expected to be halfway spent by December 11th of this year. So the timeline is moving quick, and so the time to engage again is now. Next slide, Chandler. So I'm going to put these slides, and we have them, we're going to put them up on our webinar registration page, and we are going to also send them out in an email, but just wanted to have kind of a list of all the eligible uses for that 90% that's going to the stabilization funds, looking at staff compensation and ways to actually attract more staff to the field, areas like transportation that will be important for school-age community. Next slide. Again, just giving you the language from the stabilization guidance on school-age care, which specifically states that school-age care providers meet the meeting the requirements for eligible care, including license exempt providers that meet health and safety requirements, should be included in the pool of subgrants. So if you're on this call and you are getting CCDF or you weren't sure, this is kind of some language that speaks to the fact that the Administration for Children and Families knows that you deserve and ought to be included as this work continues. So next slide. There's a 10% set aside within the stabilization funds. And I wanted to mention this quickly because this is the quality and the professional development work. And this is also really important because this is funding that can be used to support programs that haven't priorly either accepted CCDF subsidy or even gone through the health and safety requirements to be eligible. And so this can help programs to meet those eligibility. And so if that's a program on this webinar right now, I encourage you to reach out to your state and let them know that this is essential to helping expand, again, those circles of who's eligible and who's receiving care among students so that we have more programs providing students and more access to quality school-age care programs like the one that Gloria presented a picture of just a few moments ago. Next slide, Chandler. So I wanted to provide some opportunities to look at what states were doing, but given time and the fact that we might want to have some time for Q&A, I'm just going to run through these and again, refer you back to the webinar. Washington has a great grant program that really looked at how grassroots organizations could access grant programs, and so worked with their statewide after-school network as an intermediary to help programs on the ground to have the technical assistance that they needed, the cultural language translations that they needed to apply for funds. And so as we look at stabilization grant funds, which will be, again, a grant program that agencies offer, the ability to reach on the ground cultural programs and providers that don't often get opportunities is important and can be done with intermediaries like statewide after-school networks. Okay, next slide. Another example in Indiana of a statewide after-school network creating summer programs with their childcare funds to help fill that gap for families in need and with prior relief funds. Okay, next. And also just a quick mention, I did mention that the stabilization grants would be for the most part, the outline of how states will be using those funds will be due on July 1st, and that goes inside of the CCDF state plans, which are every 3 years. The states create a plan for how they're going to use their federal CCDF funds, and that planning process is happening now. So if you haven't already weighed in, I recommend that you look out and see what your state is doing. Some states have finished their planning process, but some states are engaging right now. And so I recommend that you engage because that discusses professional development opportunities for school age, grants and contracts for school age, quality systems, and health and safety modifications as well. And if your plan already has been completed, know that modifications are still allowed over the course of 3 years. So the window and the doors are not closed. Next slide. Okay, Elena mentioned this, so I'm going to skip it just on the importance of including license exempt. They do meet health and safety standards. And I'm going to skip this one as well, just other examples of states that are doing some great things. Skip over some questions and really go to the main question on this one here, which is, you know, as these funds are rolling out, which are just the largest infusion of funds as we've seen since Elena mentioned in you know, generation, is school age at the table? Are you communicating the needs of your program? If you are a director, are you ensuring that school age voices are being heard? And so you have plenty of people on this webinar in the fields and ourselves to resource, and we hope that you will as the conversation continues. So I know we don't have much more time, but I haven't seen a lot of questions in the Q&A, but do we have any questions that we want to communicate in the last few minutes? Okay, great. Well, I have a question for our, should we talk to school districts or the states? Okay, let me answer that first, but also I'd like to refer that one to Tiffany. I know you might have to jump off in a minute or so, but do you want to answer how people can communicate?
Sure. So I did see a couple questions in the chat that I tried to answer around how to get in touch about the funds. So many states are still planning how to use the funds coming from CCDBG. The guidance for the stabilization grants going to providers just came out on May 10th. And so lead agencies in your state should be updating the website soon. So within the next couple of weeks, I would say, you will be able to go on those websites. And then there are some states who will be contacting programs individually. It just kind of depends on the state. And so at that point, you'll see what your state's process is. So some may be planning for an application process or some sort of maybe Google form where you can just submit your information about your program. But it's still kind of in the planning phase. So I would say within the next couple of weeks, there will be more concrete information at each lead agency on the website.
And Sam, I don't know if you can see, but we put a link to the lead agencies in each state on our chat. And we'll also have those, again, those are linked on our webinar registration page where you can find our webinar slides after this and many of our resources. Okay, well, because we only have a minute left, I think that what we'll do is we'll close here. I really want to take that time and thank all of our fabulous panelists. The work that they do every day is inspiring and enormously important. And thank all of you on this webinar for the work that you do as well. Making these opportunities available and accessible to families that need care and to children who benefit from the work that you do, giving them high quality, engaging, enriching experiences is the things that we admire most about the work that we do. So thank you so much. We can be referenced at any time, send emails, make phone calls, make sure you make the most of this opportunity. And as always, thanks for your attention to the topic. Let us know how we can help and continue to follow the rest of our webinar series. Thank you all. Really appreciate this.